Hi folks, we're back and this is Cutting Through the Matrix. Just talking about the function of the US really and how it was set up. I think it definitely taken over, no doubt about it, with a purpose. And some high masons, of course, have written about that, America's secret destiny, all that kind of stuff. But it definitely has been very upfront in managing the world, as a policeman of the world, when Britain went bankrupt by the same boys that were determined to use Britain to take over the world. So now America, of course, is almost at the end of its tether, with incredible tax base it's had in the past to finance bases across the planet, permanent bases too. The US is scattered all over the planet. And since the days of Reagan, they decided through Gene Kirkpatrick at the time, to make permanent bases across the planet. So it was a world agenda even at that time. And we're watching it today as they squeeze the last, just like Britain too, they squeeze the last few ounces of energy from them before it goes under, because it will implode on itself with this nonsensical thing called debt. And it is nonsensical, but the fact is we'll go along on it with it, and until people really get rid of the private central banking system, every other topic you mention, it's pointless even to mention them in a sense. You have to cut off the head of the snake to stop it having the power over the whole of the body. And really that's where the whole thing is power is in money, and those boys who control the money control Congress and everything else to do with it, and all the politicians who are simply bought off and placed in power. And talking of them too, I was thinking about the degradation of society that was all part of this big system. When you look, as I say, at the different communist uprisings and even the Spanish Civil War, that had everything in there. It had all kinds of factions. You had anarchists, you had Trotskyists, you had Marxists, and you had true communists who were loyal to Russia, all fighting at the same time to save a socialist government that hadn't been in terribly long, and all hoping that eventually they'd have a coup at the end and outdo all the rest, jump over their heads and take power, seize power, which was the communist way. But when it came down to the crunch, they couldn't come together and fight anything, one single army, because they were fighting amongst themselves. And what that is, it's called contamination in psychology, and with secret services like the KGB and so on. And I've talked before about Bezmenov, who came over from basically he's stationed from Russia in India at the time, and he managed to wangle his way over to Canada. He got a job at the CBC, where he said that he'd never met so many communists as he had in the CBC, and that's obvious for if you ever try and watch their programming without your hair turning grey. But anyway, he said the same thing. He said that in the 70s the KGB was so surprised and delighted that the contamination, the moral decay, had taken on so well within the United States and elsewhere. And that, of course, was from the 60s onwards, when they were pushing the liberalism, they called it, through the school. And we find that Khrushchev and others actually called liberalism just the American version of communism. But it also meant the relaxation and the destruction of all that was before, all the previous rules. And free sex has always been at the top of the tree, because you cannot conquer society until the society cannot stand together as a society with a unified culture. It's easy pickings, and once you start breaking it up, and you find that the moral decay sets in. And then, of course, the next push is for single mothers, and then you find most women don't want children at all now. So they've been very, very successful in what they wanted to accomplish. This is all discussed, remember, in the books in communism, and you pick them up, used very, very cheap today, about the various parts of this big takeover of the West. They said that the West would fall without firing a shot from within, and they're pretty well right on that. Because even the ancients, the philosophers in Greece and elsewhere, knew that a culture that was completely and utterly immoral is a normal way to be, and it's a new normal now. You see, it's normalized. This contamination, as it's called, it's normalized. And people don't realize that they are products of a process of demoralization, and contamination. Maybe 3 generations have lived through this, and each generation makes it easier for the next one to go further and further and further, which is exactly the way it was always planned. Until you end up in the middle of a world at war. This is a world war going on. You've got a world war going on really continuously since at least the Gulf War I, I'd say, and the entire Middle East and all the NATO countries involved. That's what you call a world war, for those who don't realize what you're going through. And it never stopped with Gulf War I. Every president, including Clinton, sent cruise missile after cruise missile over into Iraq pretty well every day. And the US taxpayer picked up the tab to replace all those cruise missiles and get fresh new painted ones. It's a great business, you know, the disposable income really, as these things go pop and you immediately order a new one. But contamination, as I say, is now the norm, and it reminds me of Brave New Worlds, exactly what Huxley knew in Brave New World, and his other book, Brave New World Revisited, where he explains where the novel could actually be made to come true with the use of science and psychology and cultural control. And that's what we've been living through for an awful long time. So he knew it all back then, and he should do, because his family were related to the Darwins, and they were up in all the big global meetings of his day. And they knew eventually they'd destroy all that had kept people together and fought off. You see, if you're not unified, you can't fight off enemies of any kind whatsoever, and even in a personal level sometimes. So you must deculturalize, demoralize, and eventually you'll get to your goal of literally breeding the type of citizens you want, if you need many at all. And of course you won't need that many for this brave new world that they've been talking about for so long. And now we're at the stage, we've been living through it for years, where politicians at one time used to just step down when they were caught or found in disgrace, as it was called. Because after all, if they're going to take a position of responsibility and uphold a tradition, you see, you gotta understand traditions are awfully important. When you start throwing traditions out the window, then anything goes, and you will have no morality or integrity at the top either. And of course, I can remember when Clinton had his little dalliance, which the press made sure we all knew about. And to be honest with you, I think that really was a trial balloon, because they could have got him on so many other women before that, but they kept it quiet for years. The Secret Service were basically cleaning up all these messes that they left behind them. So when they gave you Monica Lewinsky, it was like a soap opera, and it was presented like a soap opera, and I knew then this was a trial balloon. I said, he's probably going to be more popular, especially amongst the women, after this than before. And sure enough, that's what came in the various polls. So you're trained, you're constantly being trained, and you don't know it. Isolated incidents are not so isolated after all, and they kind of come out on cue, because believe you me, if they want to cover things up at the top, you'll never ever hear about them. They're awfully good at covering up at the top. And this is again all symptomatic of a decaying civilization, the type that Professor Carol Quigley talks about, on how empires and nations rise, and they get to this stage, and then all this stuff happens. It's a formula, you understand, and then it falls apart from within. And then there's a lot of brutality, especially on the part of the state. If the state ever wants you to be defenseless, they destroy the culture first. You understand? That's what they do. And then no one will stand up for anyone else. So it's a formula. Remember, it's a formula. And so you must bring up the same formula to get the same results when you're changing into a new order, or a new world order as it is now. You know, it was Lenin said the same thing. He says, initially we'll start off, he said agencies like child care protection. That's what he's talking about. And healthcare too, by the way. And even police. Because really, you hire the cops. He says, we'll start them off as services to the public, and eventually they'll become authorities over the public. How did he know all this was going to happen with such certainty? Eh? Very old plan, this. Very old plan. And all the bigwigs and the bankers too were all in on it. The real government, the world government's been here for a long time, only previously it was waging total war across the world in every culture. What I'm trying to tell you is that when you're deculturalized, demoralized, and contaminated, you can't stand together on anything. And even amongst the patriot community, it'll be just like the Spanish Civil War, where the anarchists and the communists and the Trotskyists and all the various other groups are all fighting each other rather than standing together. You don't realize, you see, there's a lot of contamination out there. The first thing you'll hear is special rights for this group or that group or whatever. That's the first thing you'll hear. Yeah. They're already contaminated. And personally, I don't think you can save a society like that. I really don't. And so did the ancients too. They should know because they had histories of even more ancient times. Probably better and truer histories than we get today. And talking about agencies that like national health services and things like that eventually become authorities over you and tell you to get shots and all the rest of it if you want to go to school. And that's part of the stipulations now. They push the big blackmailing one. You also have this happening under this farcical nonsense of terrorism everywhere. Terrorism. You've got to all change your way of life and give up all your freedoms, and we've got to know all about you every single day for safety. All that rubbish. And people will still believe, most folk out there, not to this particular program, but there's people out there really still believe what the government tells them on everything. Everything. Yep. Doctors asked to identify potential terrorists under government plans. It's better when you have a national health system. And it says, this is in Britain, and it shows you how they're really going at it now. Incredible, big brother Britain, eh? It says, I guess the Home Secretary is called Theresa May. I don't know what she may do or may not do, however, that's her name. It's to lay out changes to the government's counter-terrorism program, and it says, doctors and other health professionals will be asked to identify people who are vulnerable to being drawn into terrorism. That's part of the government's redrawn counter-terrorism program to be detailed on Tuesday. Now, I don't want to even think. They're probably little flow charts with pictures on it, you know. Does a guy, or does he look like this? Does he sit in his chair this way, you know? Does he poke his nose, perhaps? You know, who knows? I mean, but this is the nonsense that's getting foisted on people over there now. And I tell you, do you want to go and see a doctor when they're sitting? Do you ever get angry? Well, no, doc, you know. A little bit once in a while. Really, you know, you're down as a terrorist and that's you blacklisted forever. Anyway, it says the Home Secretary May will also try to deflect criticism that the £60 million a year PREVENT program, this is to prevent terrorism getting bred in Britain. I knew it 30 years ago when I came home from another country after a couple of years and I saw saris all over the streets. And lots of Sikhs and all that. I said, what happened here? And all they'd opened the floodgate, as they said they would, by the way, in the Royal Institute of International Affairs meeting in 1938 in Australia. They said they'd do that, and actually had the guy from India, the member, speaking up, and said, we can't bring you in now. We'll have to work on the public for a while yet. And that's when they brought them all in. Anyway, and you got lots of Muslims as well. And we spend £60 million a year on the PREVENT program to stop homegrown radicalization. Then they find out that it's been going to actually create radicals, which is beautiful if you work in the Secret Service and you want to keep this thing going, isn't it? MI6 will be, and MI5 will be just laughing up their sleeves. It's working. They're creating terrorists. Didn't have them before. They're creating them right at home. Anyway, it says it's been used to spy on the Muslim community by extending its coverage to the far right and animal rights extremists. I don't know what they got to do with it, as well as Islamist groups. May has indicated that 20 of the organizations funded by the government over the past 3 years are to have their cash withdrawn after the decision to stop working with non-violent extremists. And Mr. Cameron has pushed through the change despite opposition. Isn't it all the usual rubbish with the names? I don't even bother to remember because I've heard hundreds and hundreds of these guys' names in my lifetime, and it doesn't matter because they're just faces for the agenda. They're part of an agenda for their time. That's all. That's all. That's all they are. They're just little puppets. Just little puppets that do what they're told. We'll put you in, Mr. Cameron, and we'll put you in for so many years. We'll tell him exactly how many years he's going to be in. Probably told him when he was 18. And you'll be in charge of pushing this and this and this and this through through after Brown's gone. You know. Yeah, I'm not kidding you. That's how it really does work. Anyway, the rest of this article here is on a different page. It says the extremists were given cash from anti-terror fund. This is in Britain again. Money from the government's £63 million per year anti-radicalisation budget has been given to the very extremist organisations it should have been confronting. They don't make these mistakes. You understand that? You've been taught your whole life, and again, your daily media makes you think it's all just amazing foul-ups and screw-ups and mistakes, and oh my God, we're just stumbling down through time here. You know, just making accidents and fixing them and all that. Nonsense, utter rot. You see, to keep this perpetual, it's going to be for the rest of your lives, this so-called terrorism everywhere idea going, they've got to create terrorists, and they get young guys, and they radicalize them. And they even give them leaders who look just like them, who get away with saying incredible things about destroying the country. And no one stops to think, how come he's allowed to say all that? Because he works for MI5, or CSIS, or the FBI. Anyway, it says the PREVENT strategy was launched 4 years ago to counter homegrown terrorism, but the government now admits it failed on many fronts. And so anyway, they're going to douse that one again and probably go into something. They probably have enough radicalized ones to deal with now. It takes this long too, as we all know, we're constantly lied to. When all media, and you know all media is a liar, because that's their job, is to lie to you. Their job is to give you a fake reality, to make you think that just accidents happen. And politicians give up the lunch break and just work until dawn fixing the problems. But when they tell you something that affects your very existence, your life, a life and death situation, why would you ever trust them again?